The fog rolled off the Grand Canal like a curtain being drawn over a secret. Noah Rossi stood at the bow of the water taxi, dressed in a plain black jacket with no insignia, no rings, no watch worth mentioning. To anyone who looked at him, he was invisible, a quiet man carrying black cases toward a gallery preview. That was exactly how he wanted it. Behind him sat his younger brother Leo, sketching absent-mindedly on his tablet, his eyes following the lights of Venice as they blurred past in the mist. Leo had been deaf since birth, and in a world that rarely slowed down for anyone, he had learned to read faces before words. Noah had learned, a long time ago, to protect that gift with his life. What Leo didn't know, what almost no one outside Noah's inner circle knew, was that the quiet older brother trailing behind him with the equipment cases was not an assistant at all. He was the head of the Rossi family, a name that moved money across 3 continents and made grown men flinch in boardrooms. Tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, Noah was nobody. He wanted to watch, not be watched. He had his reasons. Falcone's reasons were closing in fast. The taxi pulled up to a narrow dock behind Palazzo Cavalli, where a midnight art preview was already glowing gold through tall, arched windows. Leo's marble sculptures, 3 years of obsessive, silent work, stood draped in velvet inside, waiting to be unveiled to Venice's wealthiest collectors. It should have been a triumphant night. Instead, it was bait. Noah felt it the second they stepped inside. 2 men in expensive suits, too stiff to be guests, were watching the door. He said nothing. He simply followed Leo through the crowd, carrying the last case, keeping 3 steps behind like a man who belonged nowhere near the conversation. It didn't take long. The 2 men peeled Leo away from the crowd with practiced ease, steering him into a side gallery under the excuse of admiring an early piece. Noah drifted closer, senses sharpening, every muscle ready to move. Through the glass, he watched the taller man's mouth form hard, clipped words, a warning, maybe a threat, while Leo simply stood there, calm, unreadable, unable to hear a syllable of it, and refusing to look frightened. "Sign the rights over, tonight, or your exhibit burns before the ink dries." Noah's hand had already curled into a fist inside his jacket pocket when someone else moved faster than he did. A woman in a deep green dress cut straight through the tension like she owned the room, because in this gallery, she did. She stepped directly between Leo and the 2 men, chin lifted, voice low and lethal. "This is my gallery," she said. "You do not corner my artists in it." The taller man tried to talk over her. She didn't let him finish. "I have canal police outside who would love an excuse to walk 2 men out in handcuffs. Test me." There was no shake in her voice, no hesitation, just a woman built entirely out of certainty. The men exchanged a look, muttered something about not being worth the trouble, and slid back into the crowd like oil off water. Noah exhaled, and only then realized he'd been holding his breath. The woman turned to Leo immediately, her posture softening in an instant, and her hands began to move. Fluent, graceful Italian sign language, each gesture precise and warm. "Are you all right? They won't touch your work, I promise you that." Leo's shoulders dropped in visible relief. He signed back a quiet thank you, and something in his expression eased for the first time all night. Noah stood frozen in the doorway shadows, watching a stranger do something he had spent years searching for in the people around his brother. Genuine, fluent care, offered without hesitation, without an audience to perform for. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't need to. Something had already shifted in his chest, sudden and unfamiliar, like a door he hadn't meant to open. Later, when the crowd thinned and the velvet curtains finally came off the sculptures to soft applause, Noah asked one of the waitstaff, keeping his voice flat and disinterested. "Who was that?" "The woman in green." "Petra Moretti," the waiter said. "She runs this gallery. Best in Venice if you ask anyone with money to spend." Noah said nothing else. He simply watched Petra move through the room, checking on Leo twice more before the night ended, never once treating him like something fragile or lesser. He didn't know yet that Petra's gallery was drowning in debt to the very man who had just sent those two enforcers. He didn't know that within days her loyalty would be tested far beyond a gallery preview. All he knew, standing in the shadows with a heavy case in his hand and no name to give, was that Petra Moretti had just done something no one had managed in years. She had made the most dangerous man in Venice feel something he couldn't control. 2 days after the gallery preview, Venice wore a different face. La Fenice Opera House had been transformed for a masquerade charity auction. Chandeliers dimmed to candlelight, gilded masks catching the glow at every turn, violins threading through the murmur of wealthy collectors bidding on things they didn't need. Noah moved through it the same way he had at Palazzo Cavalli, 3 steps behind Leo, carrying a black case, playing the part of a silent handler nobody bothered to look at twice. It should have felt easy. It didn't, because now he was watching for Petra Moretti before he was watching for anyone else. She arrived in deep burgundy, a small silver mask pushed up on her forehead rather than covering her face. She never liked hiding, Noah noticed, even at a party built entirely on hiding. She greeted patrons with practiced warmth, but every few minutes her eyes swept the room, checking on Leo the way a person checks a door they don't trust to stay locked. She was right not to trust it. Noah spotted the trap before Leo did. Near the guest book table by the entrance, 2 men who didn't belong, too watchful, too still, waited beside a leather-bound book meant for signatures and well wishes. When Leo was steered toward it by a smiling woman claiming to represent a foreign museum, Noah's stomach turned cold. He couldn't read every word from across the ballroom, but he didn't need to. He'd seen enough contracts in his life to recognize the shape of one. Dense paragraphs disguised beneath a decorative header, tucked into a book meant to look harmless. Leo, trusting and unable to hear the woman's rehearsed flattery, was already reaching for the pen. "Sign here, just a small note for the museum archive," she was saying, her mouth moving with practiced ease. Leo, watching her lips, nodded politely, ready to write his name beneath English legal text he had no reason to suspect. Noah started forward. He was too far. The case in his hand suddenly felt like a stupid weight slowing him down. Petra got there first. She crossed the ballroom in a straight line, heels striking marble like gunshots, and reached the table just as Leo's pen touched paper. Her hand closed over his wrist, gentle but firm enough to stop him completely. "That's not a guest book," she said, loud enough that heads turned. "That's a transfer of exhibition rights. Page 2, paragraph 4, if anyone here reads English contract law instead of pretending to." The smiling woman's expression cracked. "You're mistaken." "I'm not." Petra picked up the leather book, flipped it open with a snap, and read a line aloud, flat, clear, devastating, pointing at the exact clause buried beneath a header about donor appreciation. Whispers rippled through the nearby bidders. Someone with a phone started recording. "This is a fraud," Petra said, turning slowly so the whole circle of onlookers could hear her. "Dressed up as a guest book, aimed at an artist who can't hear you lie to his face while you hand him a pen." The woman and her 2 watchers didn't wait to be exposed further. They melted backward into the crowd and were gone before security even reached the table, leaving behind only the torn halves of the contract, which Petra had ripped clean down the spine without a flicker of hesitation. The room buzzed with scandal and admiration in equal measure. Leo, catching only fragments of what had happened, looked between Petra and the torn paper with wide, grateful eyes. She turned to him immediately, signing fast and steady. "You're safe, I promise. Never sign anything you can't read." Noah stood at the edge of it all, case still in hand, feeling something dangerously close to pride for a woman he'd known for 2 days. Later, as the auction wound toward its final lots, Petra returned to help Leo prepare his own smaller marble bust for display. a private commission he'd brought to show a handful of interested buyers. The piece was heavier than it looked, and as they both reached to steady it on its pedestal at the same moment, her hand landed over his. Not Leo's hand, Noah's. For a second, neither of them moved. Petra glanced up first, and whatever she expected to see in the quiet assistant's face, it wasn't this. Steady eyes that didn't flinch away, a stillness that felt less like shyness and more like control. Most people fidgeted under attention. He didn't. "Sorry," she said, pulling her hand back slowly, though she didn't sound sorry at all. "You have a strong grip for someone who just carries cases." Noah said nothing, only offered the smallest incline of his head, as if the compliment, if it was one, didn't concern him. But something had passed between them, quick and electric, and Petra found herself glancing back at him twice more before the night ended, the way she'd caught Leo doing the same to her days before. She didn't know his name. She'd never thought to ask. He was simply the brother's assistant, useful and unremarkable, exactly as Noah needed her to believe. But walking home along the misty canal afterward, Petra found herself thinking less about the fraud she'd just exposed, and more about a pair of hands that hadn't trembled once. Not when stopping her, not when catching a falling sculpture, not when hers had landed on top of his by accident. She told herself it meant nothing. She didn't quite believe it. And somewhere behind her, walking 3 respectful steps back with a case in his hand and a secret in his chest, neither did Noah. By the 3rd evening, Venice had stopped feeling like a city under threat and started feeling, strangely, like home. After the gallery closed for the night, Petra insisted on taking Leo and his quiet assistant somewhere away from cameras, gossip, and gilded ballrooms. She led them through a maze of narrow alleys, past the crowds still lingering near the Rialto Bridge, to a small, family-run trattoria tucked behind a fruit stall that had clearly seen more locals than tourists in its lifetime. "My cousin owns it," she explained, pushing open a wooden door strung with dried herbs. "Nobody important eats here. That's exactly why I like it." Inside, the lighting was warm and low, checkered tablecloths worn soft from years of elbows and plates. Leo relaxed almost instantly, his shoulders dropping from the tension he'd carried since the auction 2 nights before. He signed something quick and grateful to Petra, who laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, nothing like the sharp voice she used to scatter enforcers twice her size. Noah sat across from them both, still playing his part, still quiet, but he noticed everything. The way Petra ordered without needing a menu, the way she made sure Leo could see her mouth clearly under the light before she spoke, without ever making it feel like an accommodation. The way, when their food arrived, she thanked the elderly woman who served them by name. It was over the 2nd course, once Leo had drifted into his sketchbook again, content and half listening to the restaurant's low hum, that Petra's guard finally slipped. "Can I tell you something?" she asked Noah, her voice quieter now, meant only for him. "You're easy to talk to, maybe because you don't talk back." Noah gave the faintest, almost smile and said nothing, which she seemed to take as permission. "The gallery isn't just mine anymore," she admitted, turning her wine glass slowly by the stem. "Not really. I took out loans years ago to keep it running through a bad season, and somewhere along the way, without me fully realizing it, most of that debt ended up owned by Don Falcone." Noah's expression didn't change, though something inside him went very still. "He's been patient about it," she continued, bitterness creeping into her tone. "Too patient. 2 weeks ago I found out why. He wants me to help him get close to the Rossi family's private collection. Old pieces, museum grade, worth more than my entire gallery 10 times over. He wants me to earn Leo's trust, report back what I learn, help him find a way in." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "In exchange, he forgives the debt." Noah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He kept his hands still on the table, though every instinct in him wanted to reach for a phone, make calls, burn Falcone's operation down before the sun rose. He forced himself to simply listen. "And you said no," he said instead, careful to keep his voice plain, unreadable. A servant's voice, not a boss's. "I said no," Petra confirmed, meeting his eyes directly. "I'll lose the gallery before I lose the only thing that makes it worth having. Leo trusts people slowly. He trusted me within a week. I'm not going to be the reason that trust gets used as a weapon against him." Her voice hardened, certain and unshaken. "Falcone can take the building. He can take the debt and choke me with it. He is never getting near that boy through me." She said it so simply, so completely without performance, that for a moment Noah forgot to breathe. He had built an empire out of testing people, watching who cracked under pressure, who sold loyalty for comfort, who folded the moment the cost got too high. He had expected, somewhere in the back of his mind, that everyone eventually folded. Petra Moretti, staring across a checkered tablecloth with quiet, unshakable resolve, had just proven him wrong without even trying. Across the table, Leo looked up from his sketchbook, caught the tail end of Petra's tone, and reached over to squeeze her hand once in silent thanks, though he hadn't understood a word. Petra smiled at him, soft and real, then looked back at Noah, and found him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse stumble. "You're staring," she said. "You're brave," he answered simply. "It's distracting." It was the most he had said to her since they'd met. Later, as the evening wound down and Leo dozed lightly against the window with his sketchbook still open on his lap, Petra excused herself to settle the bill. When she returned, she found her notepad, the one she used to jot down gallery notes, sitting open on the table, a single line written in unfamiliar handwriting beneath her own scribbles. "You are not alone in this." She looked up sharply. Noah was watching Leo, expression composed, giving nothing away, as if he hadn't just handed her the steadiest 4 words she'd heard in months. "Did you write this?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He met her eyes and, for the first time, didn't look away first. Something passed between them in that silence, not spoken, not signed, but understood all the same. Petra folded the notepad closed carefully, tucking it against her chest like something worth protecting. Outside, the Rialto Bridge glowed faintly gold above the dark water, and neither of them noticed how long they sat there afterward, saying nothing at all, needing nothing more than the quiet certainty that had settled, unexpected and unshakable, between them. The call came just after midnight. Petra was still at the gallery, hunched over exhibit schedules by lamplight, when a soft chime from the security monitor behind her desk pulled her attention away from the paperwork. She almost ignored it. The system flagged stray cats and drifting fog more often than actual threats, but something made her glance up anyway. What she saw made her blood run cold. 3 figures in dark clothing were moving through the storage docks beneath the gallery, the private wet dock chamber where Leo's finished marble pieces waited, crated and sealed, for their journey to the next exhibition. The men weren't browsing. They were working with purpose, one of them already crouched beside the manual flood control valves that regulated the tide gates protecting the lower chamber from the open water of St. Mark's Basin. Petra's stomach dropped as she understood exactly what they intended. If those valves opened, salt water would flood the entire storage vault within minutes. Leo's sculptures, irreplaceable, hand-carved, 3 years of silent devotion, would be ruined beyond repair. Not stolen, destroyed. A message from Falcone written in ruined marble and salt. She didn't think, she moved. Grabbing the master key from her desk drawer, she bolted from the office, down the narrow servant stairs that connected the gallery to the docks below, her heels abandoned somewhere on the second landing. She didn't call for help first. There wasn't time. And besides, security in Venice at this hour meant men who would arrive 20 minutes too late for anything that mattered. She reached the lower chamber breathless, the air thick with damp stone and brine. The valve wheel was already turning under one intruder's gloved hands, groaning in protest. Petra lunged for the secondary lock lever without thinking about the 3 men who now turned toward her and managed to jam it before the gate could fully release, buying seconds, not safety. "Get away from her!" The voice cut through the dark, low and commanding in a way Petra had never once heard from him. Noah appeared at the chamber entrance, and everything about him had changed. Gone was the stooped, quiet posture of a man who carried cases and stayed 3 steps behind. He moved like water, finding the fastest path downhill, fluid, silent, terrifyingly precise. The nearest intruder swung first, a heavy wrench aimed at Noah's skull. Noah sidestepped it without appearing to hurry, caught the man's wrist mid-swing, and used the intruder's own momentum to put him face first into the stone wall. The wrench clattered uselessly into the flooding water below. Petra pressed herself back against the valve controls, too stunned to move, as the second man rushed Noah from behind. Noah didn't turn fully, just pivoted at the hip, drove an elbow into the man's ribs with a crack that echoed off the wet stone, and finished him with a controlled strike to the jaw that dropped him instantly, cleanly, without a single wasted motion. The third man, smarter than the other 2, produced a blade. Noah's expression didn't change at all. If anything, he looked almost bored. He closed the distance in 2 steps, caught the knife-wielding arm before the blade could find its arc, twisted until the weapon fell from numb fingers, and swept the man's legs out from under him in one motion. The intruder hit the wet floor hard and didn't get up. 3 men, fewer than 30 seconds, no weapon drawn from Noah's own hands, no wasted words, nothing but calm, mechanical control from start to finish. The silence afterward felt deafening. Petra stared at him across the flooded ankles of unconscious men, chest heaving, her mind scrambling to reconcile what she'd just watched with the quiet, unremarkable man who carried Leo's tools and wrote gentle notes on restaurant napkins. "Who are you?" she finally managed. Noah crossed the chamber toward her, checking the valve lever she'd jammed, confirming the floodgate was secure before he even looked at her properly. His breathing was barely elevated. He might have just carried a heavy case up a flight of stairs, for all his composure suggested otherwise. Someone who wasn't going to let them touch Leo's work, he said, which was true, and also not an answer at all. "That's not what I asked." Petra's voice shook now, adrenaline finally catching up to her. "Assistants don't fight like that. Assistants don't move like that. You handled 3 armed men like you've done it 100 times before." Something flickered behind Noah's eyes. Calculation, maybe regret. Maybe the first crack in a mask he'd worn so long it had started to feel like skin. For a moment, Petra thought he might actually tell her the truth, standing in ankle-deep water beside 3 unconscious strangers who had come to destroy everything Leo had built. Instead, he said only, "Are you hurt?" "No," she swallowed hard. "No, I'm fine." He nodded once, businesslike, already scanning the chamber for further threats, already thinking 3 steps ahead in a way she now realized he probably always had been, hidden behind quiet obedience and careful silence. Petra watched him work, checking the men were secured, radioing something quiet and clipped into a phone she'd never seen him carry before, moving with the unmistakable authority of someone used to being obeyed, not someone used to obeying. Whoever this man really was, she understood with sudden, unshakable clarity, he was not who he'd claimed to be. And dangerous or not, secret or not, she realized she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of how much she already trusted him anyway. By dawn, the gallery's flooded storage chamber had been drained, the 3 intruders handed over to men who arrived in unmarked boats and never once identified themselves as police, though Petra noticed they treated Noah with the kind of deference usually reserved for judges, not assistants. She didn't ask questions. She was too tired, and some part of her already suspected the answers would only frighten her further. By 7 that morning, Noah had made a decision, and he made it the way she was beginning to realize he made every decision. Quickly, absolutely, without room for argument. "Venice isn't safe anymore," he told her, standing in the gallery's empty foyer while Leo gathered what tools he could carry. Falcone knows we're here. He knows the gallery is compromised. Staying is a mistake I won't make twice. And going where, exactly? Petra crossed her arms, exhaustion sharpening into stubbornness. This is my home, my gallery. My cousin's restaurant is 3 streets from here. A private estate on Murano, Noah said. Secure, isolated, easy to defend. You'll both be safe there while I handle Falcone properly. You'll both, not, I'll arrange transport for you, not, someone will escort you. The certainty in his voice, the assumption that she would simply come, might have irritated her on any other morning. This morning, after watching him break 3 armed men without breaking a sweat, she found herself packing a bag instead of arguing. The private launch that carried them across the lagoon was sleek, fast, and clearly expensive, nothing like the modest water taxis Petra was used to. She sat near the bow beside Leo, who dozed against a folded jacket, exhausted from a night that had asked too much of everyone. Noah stood near the helm, speaking quietly to the pilot in low, clipped Italian that carried none of the hesitance of a hired hand. Petra watched him for a long moment, mist curling gray around the boat, Venice shrinking slowly behind them into a smudge of gold and stone. "You're not an assistant," she said finally, loud enough to be heard over the engine, quiet enough to keep it between them. "You never were." Noah didn't turn away from the water at first. When he finally did, something in his face had already surrendered to the inevitable. "No," he admitted, "I'm not." "Then who am I traveling with?" He was quiet for a moment, the boat cutting cleanly through the pale morning water, before he answered. "My name is still Noah Rossi. That part was never a lie." He paused, choosing the next words with visible care, like a man setting down something heavy he'd carried too long. "But I'm not Leo's assistant. I run the Rossi family. All of it. The shipping companies, the private funds, the parts of the business that don't appear on paper at all. Falcone isn't just a rival collector. He's a rival in every sense that matters, and he's wanted what belongs to my family for a very long time." Petra's stomach turned cold, then hot with something closer to anger. "You let me believe you were nobody. You let me talk about the debt, about Falcone threatening my gallery, about everything, while you stood there pretending you couldn't do a thing about any of it." "I needed to know who you really were," Noah said, quiet but unflinching. "Not who you'd be around a Rossi, around money and power and protection. I needed to see how you treated Leo when you thought no one important was watching. I've spent years watching people perform kindness for my brother because they wanted something from me. I couldn't risk not knowing the difference." "So I was a test?" Petra's voice cracked, equal parts hurt and disbelief. "For days, I trusted you with things I don't tell anyone, and it was a test." "It stopped being a test the night you tore up that contract in front of half of Venice," Noah said, stepping closer, his composure slipping for the first time she'd witnessed. "It stopped the moment you told Falcone's men to test you, and meant it. I wasn't testing you anymore after that, Petra. I was just watching you, because I couldn't stop." The boat rocked gently beneath them, Murano's glass-blowing chimneys just visible now through the thinning fog. Petra stared at him, torn between the urge to walk to the far end of the deck and the undeniable pull keeping her rooted exactly where she stood. "You lied to me," she said again, softer now, less accusation than admission. "I did," he agreed. "And I'm not going to insult you by pretending it doesn't matter. It does. You deserved the truth long before now." He held her gaze, steady, unguarded in a way the quiet assistant never had been. "But everything else, the trust, the way I feel watching you defend Leo like it costs you nothing, the way I couldn't stop thinking about 4 words you found written in your own notepad, none of that was a lie. That part was the only honest thing about me this entire week." Petra didn't answer right away. The wind off the lagoon tugged loose strands of hair across her face, and she let it, unwilling to break the moment by moving. "I bought your gallery's debt from Falcone this morning," Noah added quietly, almost as an afterthought, though it clearly wasn't one. "Before we left. You're free of him, whatever you decide about me." Something in Petra's chest cracked open at that. Not forgiveness yet, not entirely, but the first fragile step toward it. She turned back toward the water without answering, but she didn't move away from him either. And as Murano's glass towers rose out of the mist ahead of them, neither of them said another word the rest of the way. They didn't need to. The estate on Murano sat behind high garden walls, its stone warmed gold by centuries of sun, its private dock hidden from the main canals by a curve of cypress trees. It didn't look like a fortress. That, Petra suspected, was exactly the point. Leo fell in love with the place within the hour. An old glass-blowing kiln room sat at the estate's eastern edge, unused for years, but still intact. Furnace, tools, work tables dusted, but functional. The moment Leo saw it through the window, he was already moving toward it, tablet abandoned, hands itching for something new to build. Noah arranged for a local glassmaster to open the space and walk him through the basics before the morning was even over. Petra found herself pulled in after him, not because anyone asked her to, but because watching Leo's face light up over molten glass and cooling tools felt like the only uncomplicated thing left in a week that had upended everything she thought she understood. "You don't have to babysit him," Noah said, appearing in the doorway sometime past noon, arms crossed loosely, watching his brother turn a glowing ribbon of glass with careful, practiced patience. "There's staff for that." "I'm not babysitting," Petra said, without looking away from Leo. "I'm working. He wants to try something new. Small pieces, glass fused to marble, something that's never been done quite this way. He needs someone who can catch his hands fast enough to keep up." She meant it literally. Over the following hours, she and Leo fell into an easy rhythm neither of them had to think about. Petra signing quick suggestions, Leo adjusting shapes with the confidence of a man finally free to fail without an audience judging every choice. They ruined 3 attempts before the 4th cooled into something genuinely striking, a slender marble base curling upward into blown glass the color of Venetian dawn, fragile and strong at once. Leo held it up to the light, grinning in a way Petra hadn't seen from him since before Falcone's men had cornered him in a gallery side room days ago. "This could be for the gala," he signed excitedly. "Something no one's ever seen." "Then we make more," Petra signed back, smiling despite the exhaustion sitting heavy behind her eyes. She didn't notice, at first, that Noah had stayed at the doorway the entire time, saying nothing, simply watching. It was only when she finally straightened, wiping glass dust from her hands, that she caught him there, arms still crossed, expression unreadable in the way she was slowly learning meant he was feeling something too large to easily show. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. Then, after a pause, more honestly, "You never once made him feel like a burden. Not today, not the entire week. Most people manage that for an hour before the effort shows." "He's not a burden," Petra said simply. "He's brilliant. You'd know that if you weren't so busy pretending to carry his cases." Something that might have been a real laugh escaped Noah, brief, surprised, gone almost as quickly as it came. He didn't argue with her. He simply watched her a moment longer before excusing himself, leaving her wondering what exactly had passed behind his eyes. That evening, as the sun dropped low and gold over the lagoon, Petra found herself in the estate's courtyard, sitting on a stone bench beneath a trellis of climbing jasmine, finally alone with her thoughts for the first time in days. The betrayal of Noah's hidden identity still sat uneasily in her chest, tangled up with something warmer she wasn't ready to name. Noah joined her without asking, lowering himself onto the opposite end of the bench, close enough that the space between them felt deliberate rather than accidental. "I have something for you," he said, and produced a folded document from inside his jacket, not dramatic, not ceremonial, just handed over plainly, the way he seemed to do most things that actually mattered to him. Petra unfolded it slowly. It took her a moment to understand what she was looking at, The original lease to her gallery, the deed transferred fully into her name. Every clause of debt and obligation to Falcone struck through and marked settled, dated that very morning. "You already told me you bought the debt," she said quietly, throat tight. "I told you I bought it from him," Noah corrected. "I didn't tell you I was giving it back to you outright. No conditions, no favor owed. It's yours. It was always supposed to be yours." Petra stared down at the paper, at years of quiet fear finally, unexpectedly, lifted off her shoulders by a man she'd known for less than a week and trusted for reasons she still couldn't fully explain. "Why?" she asked, looking up at him. "You don't owe me this." "I owe you more than this," Noah said, and for once there was no careful composure in his voice at all, just plain, unguarded honesty. "You risked everything for Leo before you knew who I was, before there was anything in it for you. That's not something I can repay with a piece of paper, Petra. This is just the smallest part of trying." The last light of evening caught the edge of the document trembling slightly in her hands. Not from wind, she realized, but from her. "I'm still angry with you," she said, though the words came out softer than she intended. "I know," Noah said. "You're allowed to be. I'll wait as long as it takes." Petra didn't answer right away. She simply folded the deed carefully against her chest, the same way she'd once folded a notepad with 4 handwritten words on it, and let the silence between them stretch out, warm and unresolved, beneath the fading Murano sky. 2 days of quiet on Murano ended the moment Noah's security chief delivered the news he'd been dreading. Falcone hadn't retreated after losing the debt leverage over Petra's gallery. He'd escalated. Intelligence chatter suggested he was mobilizing resources across 3 cities, calling in favors from allies Noah had spent years keeping neutral. Murano, for all its hidden dock and high walls, was still too close to Venice, too easily watched, too easily reached. "We moved to Como," Noah said, standing over a map spread across the estate's dining table, Leo and Petra both watching from across it. "The villa there is the most secure property my family owns. Falcone has never gotten close to it, and he won't start now." Petra didn't argue this time. Something had shifted in her over the past 2 days. Not full trust, not yet, but a willingness to follow Noah's judgment on matters of safety, even while she still held him accountable for everything else. The Rossi villa on Lake Como turned out to be less a house and more a fortress dressed in ivy and old stone, sprawling across terraced grounds that dropped toward the water in cascading gardens. Security moved through the property with quiet, constant precision. Men who nodded respectfully to Noah and watched Petra with careful, unreadable eyes, as if still deciding what she was to their boss. She got her answer to that question faster than she expected. 2 days after they arrived, a black car pulled through the villa's gates, carrying a man in an immaculate gray suit, introducing himself smoothly as Falcone's chief legal counsel, arriving under an explicit flag of truce that Noah's men reluctantly honored. The lawyer didn't waste time on pleasantries. He laid a folder on the villa's grand entrance table, opened it with theatrical calm, and slid a document toward Noah. "Financial records," the lawyer said. "Wire transfers, dated over the last 3 months, from Falcone Holdings directly to an account belonging to Ms. Moretti's gallery. My client believed you deserved to know exactly who's been feeding him information from inside your own walls." Petra's blood went cold. "That's a lie. I've never taken money from him in my life." "The paperwork suggests otherwise," the lawyer said smoothly, unbothered. Noah's expression didn't change as he studied the document, but something dangerous settled behind his eyes. The same stillness Petra had seen right before he dismantled 3 armed men in a flooding vault. "Leave," Noah said quietly. "Now, before I decide a flag of truce isn't worth honoring twice." The lawyer gathered his folder and departed without further argument, though the damage was already spreading through the villa like smoke through old wood. By that evening, 2 of Noah's senior lieutenants had requested a private word, their tone respectful but unmistakably firm. "We recommend she's detained for questioning," the taller one said, not looking at Petra directly, as if that made the suggestion easier to voice. Falsified records happen, but they don't happen without cause. We can't rule out that she's been playing both sides since Venice. She saved Leo's life twice, Noah said flatly. Once from a fraud contract, once from 3 men trying to flood a vault. Or she staged both to earn exactly this level of trust, the second lieutenant countered, careful but unflinching. You've told us yourself, sir, Falcone doesn't waste resources on amateur plays. This has his signature. Elaborate. Patient. Petra stood frozen in the corner of the study, humiliation and fear tangling together in her chest as men who barely knew her debated whether she deserved to be locked in a room and interrogated. She thought of every risk she'd taken for Leo, the enforcers, the auction fraud, the flooding vault, and felt something in her harden rather than break. I'm not going to defend myself to men who've already decided, she said, voice steady despite everything. If Noah believes I'd betray Leo after everything, then nothing I say now will change that anyway. It was Leo who moved first. He stepped between Petra and the 2 lieutenants with a suddenness that startled everyone in the room, his expression furious in a way Noah had rarely seen from his usually calm younger brother. His hands moved fast, sharp, unmistakable even to those who didn't fully understand sign language. The shapes of his fury needed no translation. She is not lying. She saved my work twice. She saved my life. If you touch her, you go through me first. Noah watched his brother, gentle, quiet Leo, who avoided conflict the way most people avoided fire, plant himself immovably in front of Petra, radiating a protectiveness Noah had spent his whole life trying to provide, and had never once seen Leo direct outward like this. The room fell silent. Noah looked at the falsified documents still sitting on the entrance table, at his brother's furious stance, at Petra's proud, unflinching refusal to beg for her own defense, and felt something settle firmly into place inside him. Stand down, he told his lieutenants, voice final. Both of you. Sir, I said, stand down. Noah's tone left no further room for debate. I'll handle this myself. The lieutenants exchanged a glance, nodded once, and withdrew, though the tension in the villa didn't fully lift with their departure. Petra remained rigid, jaw tight, refusing to let anyone see how close she was to breaking. Noah crossed the room toward her, ignoring his brother's protective stance, ignoring the falsified documents still lying open on the table behind him, and stopped directly in front of her. I already know those records are fake, he said quietly, just for her. I knew before the lawyer finished talking. Petra's breath caught. Then why let this happen? Because you deserve to see exactly how I handle it, Noah said. Not just hear promises. Watch. Outside, Lake Como's dark water lapped gently against the villa's private shore, indifferent to the storm quietly reshaping itself inside its walls. Noah found her an hour later in the villa's conservatory, exactly where he suspected she'd go. The quietest room in the house, glass walls opening onto moonlit gardens, far from the lieutenants who had questioned her loyalty and the brother who had defended her with a fury Noah had never seen in him before. He'd already dismissed the guards stationed near the corridor. Whatever happened next, he wanted no witnesses, no reports filed later, nothing standing between the truth and the woman who deserved to hear it plainly. Petra stood near the glass, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the dark water without really seeing it. She didn't turn when he entered, though he knew she'd heard him. You could have told them the truth earlier, she said, voice flat with exhaustion. Before Leo had to stand in front of me like a shield, before I had to stand there and decide whether defending myself was even worth the effort. I could have, Noah admitted, closing the door quietly behind him. I chose not to. Why? She finally turned, and the hurt in her expression hit him harder than any accusation could have. Was that a test, too? Another version of the assistant act, seeing how I'd hold up under pressure? No. Noah crossed the room slowly, stopping a respectful distance away, close enough to speak quietly, far enough not to crowd her. I had my intelligence team verify those wire transfers the moment the lawyer left the property. It took them 11 minutes to confirm the account numbers didn't exist. The documents were forged badly, honestly. Falcone's people got sloppy, or arrogant, or both. 11 minutes, Petra's voice cracked between disbelief and anger. You knew before your own men finished threatening me, and you let it happen anyway. I let my lieutenants say what they needed to say, Noah corrected, because they needed to hear themselves say it out loud and be wrong. They protect this family by assuming the worst of everyone who gets close to it. That instinct has kept me alive more times than I can count, but it almost cost me something tonight that matters more than caution ever has. He paused. You, Petra. It almost cost me you. She stared at him, some of the anger in her posture loosening, replaced by something rawer underneath. You never doubted me, not even for a second. Not for 1 second, Noah said, and the certainty in his voice left no room for performance. I watched you defend Leo from strangers who could have hurt you. I watched you tear apart a fraud in front of half of Venice without blinking. I watched you jam a flood valve with your bare hands rather than run from armed men. Falcone's forged papers weren't going to undo any of that. Nothing was going to undo that. The last of the tension went out of Petra's shoulders all at once, like a held breath finally released. She turned back toward the window, blinking hard against the sting building behind her eyes. I've spent this entire week terrified, she admitted quietly. Not of Falcone. Of you, of how much power you have, how easily you could destroy everything I've built if you ever decided I wasn't useful anymore. Men like you don't fall for gallery directors who tear up contracts and yell at enforcers. Men like you use people and move on. I'm not most men like me, Noah said, and I stopped thinking of you as useful the moment I realized I wasn't watching you for Leo's sake anymore. I was watching you because I couldn't stop. He hesitated, something vulnerable slipping through his usual composure. I've spent years building walls around every part of my life that mattered, Petra. You walked through every single one of them in less than a week, and you didn't even know you were doing it. Petra faced him fully now, moonlight catching the wet shine in her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm terrified of what loving you would mean, the danger, the lies I'd have to live with, the world you belong to. I know, Noah said simply. I won't pretend any of that isn't real. But I love you anyway, she said, the words escaping like a confession she could no longer hold back. Somewhere between the gallery and the vault and that ridiculous notepad, I fell in love with you, and I don't know how to be afraid of that fact any more than I already am. Noah closed the remaining distance between them slowly, giving her every chance to step back if she wanted to. She didn't. I never wanted to be the kind of man who lies to the people he cares about, he said quietly, close enough now that she had to tilt her face up to hold his gaze. I became that man to protect Leo, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure it never happens to you again. That's not a small promise, Petra murmured. I don't make small ones, Noah said. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair back from her face with a gentleness that felt almost startling from a man capable of the violence she'd witnessed in the flooding vault days before. Petra's breath caught, every fear she'd carried through the villa's cold corridors finally quieting beneath something steadier, warmer, undeniable. When he leaned down and kissed her, it was unhurried and certain, the kind of kiss that answered questions neither of them had said aloud, about trust, about danger, about a week that had upended both their lives and left them standing exactly where neither had expected, yet exactly where both, somehow, belonged. Outside, beneath the glass canopy of the conservatory, the gardens held still in the moonlight, as if even Lake Como understood something important had just settled quietly into place. 3 days after the conservatory, Lake Como's Grand Exhibition Hall at Via d'Este opened its doors to the largest crowd Leo's work had ever seen. The gala had been in motion long before Falcone's forged documents nearly tore Petra's world apart. International art patrons, museum curators, and private collectors flown in from across Europe, all gathered beneath crystal chandeliers to witness the unveiling of Leo's completed collection. Marble and glass stood displayed together for the first time, the hybrid pieces born in Murano's old kiln room, now polished and lit to catch every angle of the evening light pouring through the villa's tall windows. Leo moved through the crowd in a daze of quiet disbelief, watching strangers from 3 continents study his work with genuine, unguarded awe. Petra stayed close at his side, translating polite conversation into quick signs, making sure he never once felt like an afterthought in a room built around celebrating him. Noah watched them both from across the hall, dressed now in a tailored suit that finally matched who he truly was, no longer hiding behind borrowed anonymity. He'd told Petra quietly before the doors opened that tonight there would be no more pretending. Whatever came, they'd face it as exactly who they were. He hadn't expected how quickly that promise would be tested. The first sign of trouble came just past 9, when the villa's main doors opened to admit a wave of unfamiliar security personnel. Too many, too coordinated, moving with the discipline of hired muscle rather than gala staff. Behind them walked Don Falcone himself, immaculate in black, smiling the easy, confident smile of a man who believed he'd already won. "Noah Rossi," Falcone said, voice carrying deliberately across the hushed hall as conversation died around him. "Quite the collection your brothers built. Shame it's about to change ownership." Noah stepped forward, calm and immovable. "You're not welcome here, Falcone. Leave now, or my security removes you." "Your security is outnumbered," Falcone said pleasantly, gesturing toward the dozen men now spreading through the exhibition hall, positioning themselves near exits, near the display cases, near anything that might be used as leverage. "I've spent months building a legal case that this collection was financed through funds I have partial claim to. My lawyers are already filing injunctions as we speak. Tonight, I simply intend to secure the physical pieces before your appeals process buries the truth in paperwork." Gasps rippled through the crowd of patrons, phones rising to capture the unfolding scandal, whispers of theft and hostile takeover spreading faster than security could contain them. Noah's jaw tightened, calculating options, aware that any physical confrontation in a room full of international press and priceless art would hand Falcone exactly the chaos he wanted. Falcone wasn't here to fight. He was here to force a spectacle he could spin however he chose afterward. It was Petra who moved first. She left Leo's side, crossed the hall with the same unshaken certainty she'd carried into every confrontation since the night at Palazzo Cavalli, and stepped up onto the small stage reserved for the evening's formal remarks. She tapped the microphone once, and her voice, steady and clear, cut through the rising panic. "Before anyone believes a word Don Falcone just said," she announced, "I think this room deserves to see something." She held up a tablet, connected it to the hall's display system with practiced speed, and projected a series of documents across the massive screen behind her. Financial ledgers, wire transfers, shipping manifests, all stamped with dates and account numbers that painted a damning, undeniable picture. "These are verified records," Petra continued, voice never wavering despite the sea of unfamiliar faces watching her. "Falcone Holdings has spent the last 3 years laundering stolen art through shell galleries across Europe, forging provenance documents and extorting independent curators, myself included, into feeding him information under threat of financial ruin. I have the account trails. I have the falsified contracts his own agents tried to trick a deaf artist into signing at a masquerade auction 2 weeks ago. And I have sworn statements from 3 men his people sent to flood a private storage vault in Venice." The room had gone utterly silent, every phone now recording, every patron staring between Petra and Falcone with dawning, horrified understanding. Falcone's smile finally cracked.
"This is slander, fabricated to protect the Rossi. It's verified," Petra cut him off, unflinching. "Independently, by forensic auditors who don't answer to me or to Noah Rossi. Check the ledger numbers yourselves if you don't believe me." Chaos erupted across the hall almost immediately. Several of the invited guests, journalists, museum board members, a handful of European financial regulators who'd been quietly monitoring Falcone's dealings for months, began making calls of their own. Falcone's hired security, sensing the shift in the room, hesitated, clearly unprepared for a public unraveling instead of a clean, quiet extraction. Then the real authorities arrived. International police, alerted hours earlier by Noah's own legal team, working in tandem with financial investigators, moved through the villa's main entrance with quiet, practiced efficiency, flashing credentials that made Falcone's private security stand down almost instantly, rather than risk obstruction charges layered atop everything else now unraveling in public. Falcone's composure finally shattered entirely as officers began working through the crowd toward him, guests parting instinctively to give them a clear path. Noah crossed the hall to stand beside Petra as the room dissolved into controlled chaos around them, pride and something fiercer burning behind his eyes. "You just brought down his entire operation in front of half of Europe's art world," he murmured. "I brought down a man who threatened my gallery, tricked your brother, and flooded a vault to destroy 3 years of his work," Petra said, still breathing hard from adrenaline, watching Falcone's face twist with fury as officers closed in around him. "I've been waiting to do that for a very long time." Across the hall, Leo watched the scene unfold with wide, astonished eyes, then turned to find Petra's gaze and signed something simple, fierce, and unmistakably proud. "That's my sister." Petra didn't need Noah to translate. She was already crying and smiling all at once. Chaos still gripped the exhibition hall when Don Falcone made his move. While officers pressed through the crowd toward him, he shoved past a startled patron, grabbed the leather-bound master ledger from a nearby display table, the very evidence Petra had used to expose him, and bolted for a side exit that led down through the villa's terraced gardens toward the private pier below. Noah saw him break for the doors before anyone else registered what was happening. "He's going for the water," Noah said, already moving, cutting through the panicked crowd with the same fluid precision he'd used against 3 armed men in a flooding Venetian vault. Petra followed close behind, ignoring the chaos of scattering guests and confused security, her heels abandoned somewhere near the stage steps for the second time in as many weeks. Falcone was fast for a man his age, adrenaline driving him down stone steps 2 at a time, past dark hedges and moonlit fountains, toward the small private dock where a sleek speed launch sat idling, engine already running, prepared as a contingency Falcone had clearly arranged long before tonight went wrong. He nearly made it. Noah reached the pier just as Falcone's hand closed around the boat's mooring line, cutting off the narrow wooden walkway with the same unshakable calm he brought to every confrontation that mattered. "It's over, Falcone," Noah said, breathing steady despite the sprint down the gardens. "The evidence is already in police hands. Running only makes the charges worse." "You think this ends with handcuffs?" Falcone spat, still clutching the ledger against his chest like a life raft. "I have accounts in 6 countries, lawyers who've buried worse than this. You've cost me a building and a bad night, Rossi, nothing more." "No," Noah said, and something cold and absolute settled into his voice. "I've cost you everything." He produced his phone, already prepared, and with a single call confirmed what his legal and financial teams had been quietly assembling for days. Freezing orders executed simultaneously across every jurisdiction where Falcone held assets, triggered the moment tonight's evidence went public. Shell companies collapsed, offshore accounts locked, shipping contracts voided by partners no longer willing to be associated with a name now trending across international financial news. "You spent years building your empire on stolen provenance and extorted debt," Noah continued, watching the color drain slowly from Falcone's face as the calls confirming each frozen account came through one by one. I spent tonight making sure none of it survives past midnight. Not because I wanted revenge, because you threatened my brother, and you threatened the woman I love, and there isn't a court in the world fast enough to stop me from ending this myself. Petra arrived at the pier just in time to hear the last of it, breath catching at words spoken so plainly, so certainly, in front of a man who no longer had the power to threaten either of them. Falcone's shoulders sagged as the reality of total, coordinated ruin finally landed. He looked toward the idling launch, toward open water and the faint, useless hope of escape, and seemed to consider it for one desperate moment before international officers finally reached the pier behind them, flashlights cutting across the dark water. "Don Falcone," the lead officer called out, "you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and trafficking in stolen cultural property." Falcone didn't resist. There was nothing left to resist with. He simply let the ledger slip from his hands as officers moved in, the leather book landing with a soft thud on the wooden planks of the pier. The same book that had started as evidence of his crimes, and now marked the end of his empire. Noah stepped forward, bent, and picked it up himself before anyone else could. He didn't say anything triumphant. He didn't gloat, didn't linger over Falcone's arrest with the satisfaction some men might have allowed themselves after years of quiet rivalry finally ending. He simply crossed the pier toward Petra, the recovered ledger held out between them like something sacred. "This belongs to you," he said quietly. "Every page of it. You're the one who found the courage to use it." Petra took the ledger with trembling hands, watching over Noah's shoulder as officers led Falcone away in handcuffs toward a waiting car. His once immaculate composure finally completely gone. "What happens now?" she asked, voice still unsteady from the night's chaos. "Now the ledger becomes part of the official case record," Noah said. "But more importantly, it becomes proof, publicly, permanently, that you were never Falcone's accomplice, that you were the one who brought him down. No one questions your integrity after tonight. Not the art world, not the authorities, not anyone." Petra let out a shaky breath, the weight of weeks of fear finally beginning to lift from her shoulders. She looked down at the ledger in her hands, then up at the man beside her, no longer a quiet assistant, no longer a mystery she couldn't quite name, just Noah, fully himself for the first time since she'd met him. "You destroyed his entire empire in under 10 minutes, she said, something close to disbelief still coloring her voice. "He threatened everything I care about," Noah said simply. "I don't do things by half measures when that's on the line." Behind them, the last of the police vehicles pulled away from the villa's grounds, sirens fading into the quiet Como night. The gardens, so recently a scene of chaos, settled slowly back into stillness, moonlight spilling silver across the lake's calm surface. Petra tucked the ledger against her chest and let Noah pull her gently into the circle of his arms, both of them finally allowing themselves to exhale after a fight that had followed them from Venice's fog-covered canals all the way to this quiet, victorious pier. Falcone was gone. The threat that had shadowed every step of the last 2 weeks was finally over. And for the first time since the night Noah had watched a stranger in green defend his brother inside a Venetian gallery, the future in front of them looked, at last, entirely their own. 2 weeks passed, and Lake Como settled back into the kind of quiet that only comes after a storm has fully broken. Falcone's arrest had made headlines across Europe: fraud, extortion, trafficking in stolen cultural property, charges stacking high enough that even his most expensive lawyers could only slow the inevitable, not stop it. His empire, once feared across 3 continents, dissolved within days into frozen accounts and abandoned shell companies. A name that had made grown men flinch, now reduced to court filings and closed investigations. Leo's exhibition, meanwhile, had become the talk of the international art world for entirely different reasons.
What began as a private gala, interrupted by a hostile takeover attempt, had, almost overnight, transformed into one of the most talked-about launches in years. The story of a deaf sculptor's brilliance, a curator's courage, and a criminal empire exposed live in front of Europe's wealthiest collectors, proving impossible for the press to resist. Museums that had never returned Leo's calls before now competed for exclusive rights to his hybrid glass and marble pieces. Sales records fell within the first week. Offers poured in from cities Leo had only ever seen in books. He took it all with the same quiet, steady grace he'd carried through every threat and every triumph, more interested in his next piece than in the noise surrounding the last one. On a warm afternoon, with the worst of the chaos finally behind them, Leo found Petra and Noah together on the villa's private terrace overlooking the lake, sunlight scattering gold across water calm enough to forget it had ever carried danger toward them. He crossed the terrace with his usual unhurried confidence, sketchbook tucked under one arm, and settled into the chair beside them long enough to sign something warm, teasing, and entirely sincere. "I couldn't have asked for a better sister-in-law," he signed, glancing pointedly between Petra and his brother, a knowing smile spreading across his face. "Took you both long enough to admit it," Petra laughed, cheeks warming, while Noah simply shook his head, unable to fully hide his own smile. Leo, satisfied with having said his piece, rose again, offered a small, mock bow toward them both, and wandered back toward the gardens, leaving them the privacy he seemed to have sensed they needed. Noah watched his brother go, something soft and unguarded settling over his expression, the same look Petra had first glimpsed weeks ago in a shadowed Venetian doorway, before she'd known his name, before either of them had understood how far this would go. "He's happy," Petra said quietly, watching Leo disappear around a hedge, sketchbook already open again, mind clearly already chasing some new idea. "Genuinely happy. I don't think I've seen that from him since the night we met." "He's safe," Noah said. "For the first time in years, he doesn't have to wonder who's protecting him and why. That matters more to me than any exhibition record." "You gave him that," Petra said, turning to face him fully. "Not just by stopping Falcone, by trusting him enough to let people in, finally. By trusting me." "You earned that trust before I ever admitted who I really was," Noah said. "I just finally stopped being foolish enough to hide it." He reached into his jacket then, movements deliberate, unhurried, the same quiet certainty he brought to everything that mattered. When his hand emerged, it held a small velvet box, and Petra's breath caught before he'd even opened it. "I've spent my whole life building things designed to protect people," Noah said, voice steady despite the moment's weight. "Companies, security, contingencies for every threat I could imagine. None of it ever felt like it was building towards something worth having. Until you tore up a fraudulent contract in front of a room full of strangers because you refused to let anyone hurt someone you barely knew." He opened the box. Inside sat a ring set with a rare, deep green Venetian gem, cut to catch the light the same way her dress had that very first night in the gallery. "I'm not asking you to simply stand beside me," Noah continued, holding her gaze without wavering. "I'm asking you to run the Rossi family's global cultural foundation with me, properly, publicly, as an equal partner in every part of my life, not hidden away or protected from the weight of it. I want the world to know exactly who you are to me. Not an associate, not someone I'm protecting from a distance." He paused, something raw finally breaking through his composure entirely. "My wife, Petra, if you'll have me." Petra stared at the ring, then at the man holding it out to her, the quiet assistant who had turned out to be the most dangerous, most devoted man she'd ever known, who had tested her without cruelty, protected her without smothering her, and trusted her completely the moment it truly mattered. "You already know my answer," she said, voice thick with emotion, tears slipping free despite her best effort to hold them back. "You knew it the night you handed me my gallery's deed and told me it came with no conditions." "I want to hear you say it anyway," Noah said, the faintest smile finally breaking through. "Yes," Petra said, laughing through her tears as he slid the ring onto her finger with the same steady hands that had once caught a falling sculpture, jammed a flood valve, and disarmed 3 armed men without hesitation. "Yes, completely, entirely, yes." He pulled her into his arms, and this time there was no hesitation, no secret left standing between them, no assistant's disguise hiding what he truly felt. Behind them, Lake Como stretched wide and calm beneath the sinking sun, the same water that had carried them from danger to safety, now simply beautiful, simply theirs. Somewhere in the gardens, Leo glanced back toward the terrace, caught sight of the ring catching sunlight on Petra's hand, and broke into a grin wide enough to rival his sister-in-law's own. Their journey, from strangers hiding behind masks and disguises, through fraud and sabotage and a criminal empire's final collapse, had finally arrived exactly where it was always meant to. Not as enemies, not as strangers, as family, whole and unafraid, with nothing left to hide.